Hi everyone. As promised, I'm making a video about the balancing of the game, and I think it's important to start with the goals of balancing. So, what you want to achieve. I think the main goal of balancing is to maximize the amount of viable units, builds, strategies that are in the game, and you do this because you want to have diversity and depth in your game. These increase the pleasure people can experience because they can play a lot of different things. And if you have to keep playing the same thing because it's the strongest, um, this becomes boring after a while. So the main goal of balancing is to maximize the amount of viable and strong um, uh, strategies and units and variety that there's in the game. So keeping this in mind, I want to discuss a few important things I think of the balance in Total War Warhammer. In this video I won't talk about the faction balance. I already made a previous video where I discussed the strengths and weaknesses of the different factions and made a tier list. So instead I will focus on other points I think are important in balancing the game. So the first thing I want to talk about is magic in the game. I think magic is actually a great addition for a Total War game because it gives more depth, it gives a lot more options and possibilities that you need to keep in mind, and in this way it makes it more complex and more fun to play. But magic is also very imbalanced at the moment. So there's some schools of magic that are very useful and very strong. There's others that are very weak and almost never used. So the main schools of magic that are used a lot at the moment are death magic, and any type of magic with magic missile projectiles, mostly being light magic, and vampire magic has a nice heal, but those basically are the only spells that are being used at the high level at the moment. The reason for this is that a lot of the other spells just aren't cost efficient. For instance, let's calculate a little bit. Raise Death, the spell that raises zombies, it costs 9 mana, and you raise 1 unit of zombies. A unit of zombies is worth 150 gold. While Fate of Buna, the spell that does direct damage versus multiple combatants, only costs 13 mana, so that's only 4 more. And with this you can do, for instance, 3/4 of HP damage versus a unit of demigryphs, which roughly translates to like 1000 gold value, because all the models still remain alive, but it does a lot of damage to them. And some people might say this is OP, but I feel it's one of the few types of magic that actually feels impactful to use. And even though it's very strong, it also has positive sides. For instance, while demigryphs knights are very strong, because of death magic you have a good way to counter them, and death magic is always focused on killing off single unit type, so it's good against things that are considered very strong or powerful, and in that way kind of counterbalances strong or OP units. However, I think the strong point, what makes death magic really too strong, is the effect it gives when you have air dominance. So you can just fly over with a death magic user and use if you have air dominance, you can just use that to target any unit you want at will, and it doesn't matter if they have missile units because you can just dodge them, and there's relatively little counterplay to this. Additionally, there's no opportunity cost for using a lot of mana on death magic or, for instance, magic missiles, because these spells are good, but if they use quite a lot of mana, and if you, for instance, use 4 spirit leeches to kill an enemy general, this costs you a lot of mana, and let's say buff spells were really strong and really powerful. If this was the case, then the enemy could have used some buff spells during this period of time and maybe won the melee engagement. This shows that because buff spells are really weak at the moment, there's no opportunity cost, so there's no loss for using the mana on death magic on another field, so to say. But my personal biggest issue with magic at the moment are magic missiles, because they are extremely random. They can two-shot a general, or they can just miss and do nothing. And the randomness of magic missiles, I think, can be game deciding. For instance, if you get great hits on your first two magic missiles on an enemy general, that decides the game in your favor if you play against relatively equal scaled players. But if it does nothing the first two times, you waste a lot of mana, you waste your cooldowns, and the opponent can get a great advantage based on that. The good thing about magic missiles is that they are good versus air. So mounted air units, they are a lot easier to hit with magic missiles, and in that way it's kind of the only way to deal with flying death generals and to deny them some airspace, so to say. But I feel magic missiles are super unreliable, and personally I think random based things in a game, they can have their impact or they can have their place in a game, because they make that a game doesn't always turn out the same way, and players need to adapt to how some things turn out. But I think this amount of randomness is way too much, and it shouldn't be so that a player just gets two great magic missile hits and wins the game off of that, instead of superior tactics or something like this, and a planned way of playing wins the game. So I think that is really a bad thing. Then I'd like to go into why buff spells are so underwhelming at the moment. I think this is very clear in high level play at the moment in multiplayer. All players spread their units out to the max distance, so to say, so the max width. And this is because in this way you can have the maximum amount of your units, the models of your units engaged in combat, and get the most out of your unit. And also, by drawing out to the max distance, you can have leftover units on the flanks that aren't engaged, and you can wrap around and hit your opponent in the back. But how this is relevant with buff spells is that if you draw out your units to the max width, the radius of the buff spells is so small that you can only hit 2 or at most 3 units at a time, and you don't get much value out of the buff spells, and they still cost a lot of mana, but they only affect 2 units, and it's definitely not worth the mana cost, so to say. Or for instance, bringing a 700 gold wizard to cost, let's say, 4 or 5 buffs in a fight. It's definitely not paying off, because you only give 2 units a temporary stats boost, and bringing 700 gold, you can better just bring in an additional unit and get a lot more value out of it. So to summarize magic, in my opinion, death magic isn't that OP. For instance, if you use Spirit Leech to kill a general, you need to cast it 3 or 4 times. So you pay 21 mana or 28 mana to kill a general. I think, and also you can avoid it to some extent. The thing by keeping your distance, but the thing I think that makes death magic OP is the mobility of air units that linked with this ability to use death magic. I think if you have the mobile air units and you can just target whenever and whatever with in relative safety, that is very powerful. And if you wouldn't be on a flying mount that has 100 or 110 speed casting these spells, it's a lot harder to get them off and get the value out of them that you want. So I think this is the main reason why death magic is so powerful at the moment. And obviously it can be tweaked, but I think this is the main reason for it. Additionally, I feel like the other magic is just not strong enough that you have a decent opportunity cost, that you can't use the mana for other purposes, so to say. And overall, my biggest issue with Magic at the moment is that magic missile spells are so random and can be so game deciding that I feel, first of all, not very keen on using them, but also they just, because they are so unreliable, but also um, they are just game deciding based on random chances, and that's never a good thing, I think. Okay, the next issue I would like to discuss is single unit size units. So, for instance, giants, team tanks, Arachnarok Spider, these kind of units. Or hero spam, that's also a very relevant issue. So, these units, if you just have one and you face them up against the equal cost other unit, they will almost always lose. They get surrounded, and because they get attacked from all sides and allow a lot of enemy models in combat, they get beaten. However, if you spam, let's say, 5 or a few giants in a very dense formation, the enemy models with a lot of units, they can't all hit them, and you have a very powerful dense power in that area where you use all the single unit units. So this can cause some issues, because while in a normal fight straight up the bigger unit size units are stronger, if you spam these small units and you bunch them up together, it's very hard to take them out. I'm actually not sure how to balance this, except for putting a limit on like big single unit size units. But because you don't want to make them so weak that they aren't cost efficient anymore, so to say. So this is a difficult issue. However, recently Steam Tanks, using a lot of Steam Tanks has seen a lot of play, and I've been using Steam Tanks, like one Steam Tank sometimes in armies as well, but I feel like to make them cost efficient, you really need to have a lot of uptime, because Steam Tanks are really difficult to kill. They can kite, they're fast, and if the enemy doesn't have cavalry or gunners or something, it's very hard to deal with them. But they don't do a lot of damage for the amount of money that they cost, or not a lot of DPS, so to say. So you need to kite, you need to drag out the game entirely long for them to be cost efficient. But I think the main issue with Steam Tank is they have 200 armor and they can fire a lot, but even the steam that they blow in close combat, it also costs ammo. However, if you run out of ammo, you can still use it. So basically, you can just infinitely run around, kite the melee, and hit them with steam even when you're out of ammo. This doesn't make any sense. So I feel like if you are out of ammo, you shouldn't be able to use the steam thingy anymore, and get in melee instead. Otherwise, you can just infinitely kite and drag out any game. But this is an easy fix for this, but I think additionally, to make a Steam Tank better, so to say, is reduce the amount of ammo, let's say to 100 instead of 200, but make the ammo that it has more powerful, so that it has higher DPS, and it isn't a unit that's only viable if you drag that game out a long time and just charge and yeah. I think that's a nice unique playstyle, but I think it's a little too long and dragged out and no fun to play if you're against it. So okay, and then the last point I would like to discuss is unit archetypes. So for instance, melee, infantry, ranged, cav, artillery, etc. So I feel at the moment ranged units you don't see them a lot at a high level of play, where people try to play optimally, and I feel this is because the fights, you have very little uptime before the fights. Like in previous Total War games, you could maybe get like 2 or 3 volleys off before you clashed, but also ranged units now get fatigued from shooting, and this actually goes rather fast. So if you get 4 volleys off, or as you can see in the video, if you get a decent amount of volleys off, your unit already starts getting fatigued and even exhausted. This means once, let's say because you bring ranged units, your melee line breaks and you want to kite a little bit, the enemy melee might actually catch up to you and catch you because your units are exhausted. I think this actually contributes to ranged units not being that strong at the moment, because I think they fatigue too fast. For instance, a gunner might already be winded after 4 volleys. I think that's not realistic, and it is also not beneficial for the game. The reason why range units aren't that powerful at the moment might be because elves are coming, and the wood elves traditionally have very powerful archer units. So maybe this is why the other range units aren't that strong. But I feel, for instance, the dwarf unit also heavily rely on their ranged units, and they aren't that powerful in this game either. So I feel like in general ranged units aren't that powerful, and this might also contribute to I think cav units not being that powerful. I feel like cav units are okay, they're decent, but outside of Demigryph Knights, they don't have a really unit that is very, very strong, that you would say, yeah, I always want to bring this unit. Except the only way they are good is if you get nice back charges on enemy melee lines. But this might also change if ranged units become more popular and stronger. Then obviously the cav counters the ranged, and cav will become stronger in that way. So I think this kind of balances out. If the one thing is looked at, then the other thing also becomes stronger. I think if the issues I mentioned before, like the magic and the unit types, etc., being looked at, I think this will also make the faction balance better. But as I said previously, I made a faction video before, so if you want to know my opinion about the different factions and how powerful and what their weaknesses are, you can look at that video, and I also discuss a little bit what I think the weaker ones lack and the stronger ones, what is too powerful about them. Okay, so these were the main points I felt strongly about balance. I think overall the game is relatively balanced, and there's a lot of different strategies out there that are viable. Although I feel like vampire counts and aerial dominance to kill priority targets is a bit too dominant at the moment. Besides that, I feel it's relatively easy to fix, and there's a lot of tactics and strategies that are viable. So there's definitely potential. So this was the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you around.